Hey there, it's Evan Nathaniel Grim. Welcome to the latest episode of my podcast, Astrology Unbound. Today we're going to be talking about Saturn and Neptune retrograde. That's right, both of these planets are going to be retrograding in Pisces. I'll be talking about how you can take advantage of the energies over the next 5 months or so, also what to look out for. And these retrogrades are definitely going to be very reflective, introspective, and we will see a lot of delusions melting away. There will be some stark and harsh truths coming through, but by understanding what's really going on, either with the narratives in the public or the stories you're telling about yourself, you're going to be seeing yourself and your role in society much more clearly. And so I'll be talking about what are the themes in the collective, also what to expect in your own life. And before I start today, be sure to check out my Substack newsletter for an in-depth breakdown of how these retrogrades and future events will impact each of the signs. But I also, again, cover global predictions and things of that nature. And it's free to subscribe to the Substack. And I post at least one article per week. And you can really get into sort of the machinations of how I come up with forecasts. There's educational content and even monthly meetups and chats with me. So definitely check that out. And now let's talk about the topic at hand. So Saturn and Neptune retrograde in Pisces. Anytime a planet retrogrades, let's just kind of define the retrograde at a high level. Retrograde is an optical illusion where a celestial body appears to be tracing a path backward in the sky, and retrogrades signify a time period in which you're doing anything that starts with the prefix re. So it could be revisiting, reevaluating, retracing, reconsidering, reflecting, etc. And that sort of mindset, you have to apply that mindset to the planet in question. So a Mercury retrograde is the one that most people are familiar with, and that's when you are revisiting your decisions, your conversations, you're double checking your emails, and so on. But when we have a planet like Saturn retrograde, Saturn is the planet of discipline, delayed gratification, responsibility. Sometimes it's really about, in a lot of ways, it's like a sobering reality check. And a lot of people, myself included, believe that when Saturn is retrograde, it's actually even more forceful and powerful and it's sort of dominant in our consciousness. And the analogy that I would give for Saturn retrograde is it's kind of like a teacher who double checks our work. So, put yourself back in high school and think about, that time that, you got a B plus on the exam that you kind of were winging it and you didn't actually study at all. So in that Saturn retrograde example, it would be, the teacher is, grading the test twice. And he or she realizes, okay, actually I missed that you got these other questions wrong. More like a B minus. And so, it's sort of that double whammy where it's like, Saturn retrograde is really digging into what could be better. It's really scrutinizing everything we're doing, because think about Saturn as, it's the eye in the sky. It's very much about judgment, and basically it's the Lord of Karma. So it's like every action has a reaction. Every cause has an effect, and the things that we've been doing, the responsibilities we've been taking, the commitments we've been making since Saturn stationed direct last November in 2023, I believe it was November 4th. Ever since that time, we've been moving forward with new, long-term goals, and Saturn is very much about our professional lives. And so as it starts to station, the actual station of a planet, when it starts to, again, optically slow down in the sky before tracing backwards, it's almost like that planet is grinding to a halt and it really gathers its full strength in a way. So Saturn is stationing retrograde on June 29th, to be exact. And on June 29th, really the decisions you make around that time and in the days leading up to that point are going to be pivotal in your psyche over the next 4.5 months up until November 15th when it stations direct. So between June 29th and November 15th, it's not that you can't do anything new professionally or you can't take on sort of new commitments, but your energy is a little bit better served thinking about some of the commitments you've already made since last November. And we'll talk about today what Saturn and Pisces means in particular, and what Neptune also means in Pisces. But I think that to carry onward here, we want to think about before we do that a little bit more of the nature of a retrograde. So I want to add in that a retrograde sort of has the nature of the 12th house, in my opinion. So when we think about the houses of the chart, the houses of the sky, the houses of your birth chart, the 12th house has this energy of being in a liminal space, being in a cavern, being in isolation, but sort of being a precursor to a new cycle. It's like when we're releasing, letting go, but also it's a time where, we are really going inside, going inward before we kind of like leap forward into the first house, and the first house is taking charge. And so think about a retrograde as we're taking a moment to kind of isolate and reflect before stepping forward. So with Saturn and Neptune both in this retrograde phase coming up, anytime. So again, even if you want to start something new professionally, you want to take a little bit of a pause and stall and think, okay, well, if I want to do something that's going to affect, the next, it's going to change my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan, or I'm going to launch a business, or, I'm going to do something, that's going to be very, high impact in my life. At the very least, you want to think about and kind of contextualize it in the sense of like, what have I been doing the last, 7 months or so since Saturn stationed direct. So that would be informative to your decisions. So again, reflect before you act with anything Saturnian. So again, we're talking about your professional life and your major commitments. And so, Saturn again is discipline and structure in that way. So the retrograde hopefully can help you again make even better decisions. Now, I want to talk about the fact that Neptune is also retrograde. Neptune is the planet of dreams and illusions. Yes, it's our spirituality, but it can also be a source of deception and uncertainty. Neptune is stationing retrograde very shortly thereafter on July 2nd. Now, the reason that these two planets are stationing retrograde at similar times is because they're starting to come closer together in the sky. They're starting to, veer towards a conjunction, which they will make officially in February 2026, but in the summer of 2025, they will also be both in the sign of Aries, very close to a conjunction. And when Neptune is retrograde, we are, again, reflecting, revisiting, introspecting regarding our spiritual journey, how we are either, it's really like, where is our imagination taking us right now? Like, we're really reflecting on like, what are my dreams? Like, what do I want to like create magic around? But it's also a time where you're reflecting on, where have I been deluding myself? Where have I been completely succumbing to, where have I been withdrawing from reality entirely? Where have I been lying to myself? Or how have I been lied to? So to have both of these planets retrograding, by the way, in the sign of Pisces at the same time, it really is a moment where we are reflecting and refining, what we want to do over the long haul in the context of these sort of facades and, just these walls just kind of crashing down, and these, again, these sort of fabricated narratives sort of collapsing. So you're going to feel maybe a bit of there will be probably some moments of like a letdown for you, either at a societal level where it's like maybe some sort of leader that you were standing behind is suddenly not so stable, or maybe a company that you thought was well intentioned is not, or maybe a relationship you thought was really stable is not, or again, maybe it comes down to you. Maybe it's like you think about, wow, I've really been telling myself that, or maybe I've been wallowing in self pity about something and I really shouldn't. Or maybe I thought that I was this type of person, but I'm really, not that way at all. So there is going to be definitely some sort of unmasking with Saturn and Neptune retrograde in Pisces, because Pisces is the sign that deals with these Neptunian concepts of, aspirations, dreams, getting away and above our ego, feeling solidarity with the collective. Like there's something very ethereal and universal about Pisces. Empathetic, and of course it can be about healing as well. But for many people during the retrograde, because Saturn is also involved, it's like very much a sobering reality sinking in. And as part of this, I want to talk about the actual cycle of Saturn and Neptune, though, briefly, because this is a 36-year cycle that's closing out at the same time. So Saturn and Neptune have an approximately 36-year cycle where they come together. And, to understand some context here, let's go back to 1989. This is the last time that we had this conjunction, and we're living in the later stages of that cycle. And that was a time that was marked by, major societal shifts. We had the fall of the Berlin Wall. We had the collapse of the USSR. And that's very much in keeping of the themes of Saturn and Neptune. So as we talk about Saturn and Neptune forming an alignment, and again, in a retrograde phase before their next alignment, so we're kind of reflecting on what is that, maybe that new system we want to create, what are those new hopes and dreams that we want to fulfill. Think about, again, Saturn is structure and discipline, Neptune is dreams and delusions. And so when you have Saturn and Neptune together, it's sort of like our foundations are built on sand, not really that firm. And Saturn is in Neptune's sign, so Saturn has to play Neptune's game to some extent. So what you want to be thinking about during this retrograde is like, how can I build a foundation around my dreams? And also, though, how can I bring in a dose of reality so that I'm not just completely letting my fantasies run rampant? But at a societal level, like I've given the example of, the Berlin Wall falling and the dissolution of the USSR, like there is a feeling here of like the very sort of social customs and norms and systems that we adhere to are starting to loosen. They're starting to fracture. They're starting to, starting to dissolve, really. And, if you even trace back some of these other conjunctions, 1917, Russia assembles a socialist government. You had the Bolshevik Revolution. 1773, in the what became eventually became the United States, the colonialists are protesting British taxes on tea. So we had the Boston Tea Party. And so with Saturn and Neptune, we actually do have the precursor oftentimes to revolutions. We also have the merging of systems. Sometimes we have, again, the collapse of systems or the unification of systems. So in the most recent conjunction, 1989, as the USSR collapsed, we started to build a more globalized world. Everything was more connected. But we're starting to see how that system maybe hasn't really worked. We're starting to see how a global sort of governing body, many of the representatives of which are not elected by the people, we're starting to see how that's very disempowering for the individual. So right now, it's like, yes, during these retrogrades, you want to think about what is the role that you're going to play in this society as you strive for specifically enlightenment and as you try to achieve these Piscean dreams. But as you pursue enlightenment, remember that we are all a function and a part of a greater society. And, how do we want that society, that structure, the government, the corporations that we, work with and work for, like how do we want them to kind of reflect the illumination that we're experiencing inside? So in a beautiful way, not only with being at the late stage of the Saturn-Neptune cycle, but being in a retrograde phase, it's like we're releasing and we're planting seeds for the next cycle, which really begins, I would argue, next summer 2025 through early 2026. So there's a lot on your plate there. And I know I'm speaking about these very grandiose concepts, but that's just the nature of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. So it's like the common themes here as you go back to 89, 1917, 1773, it's like Saturn and Neptune combined, it really is a harbinger of new causes and ideals, maybe new forms of governance. So That's the task at hand. But during these retrogrades, think about, again, how am I achieving coherence inside? How am I feeling like I'm developing an understanding of energetics, of my own spiritual quest? I have a clear sense of like how I'm growing and evolving in the spiritual world. And by waking up individually, you're going to play a more prominent role as Saturn and Neptune realign as we plant the seeds for a new cycle. By the way, at the 0 degree point of Aries, which is the beginning of the zodiac. So you could literally be instrumental in the engineering of a new system. And so, again, fast forward to now during these retrogrades. We're at the tail end of the cycle. So we're going to see these themes of like crumbling of structures, but also some identity crises, not just within ourselves, but globally. And I think that, we're at a pivot point too, where it's like we're starting to see the cascading impacts of what the baby boomers generation, what their vision of the world has been and where it's led us. So baby boomers really, as adults, built the world that we live in now in 1989, approximately. And of course, that is a culmination of many years prior where we're seeing these cultural trends. But in 1989, as the wall collapses and we have, the disappearance, or I guess the sort of dissolution of the USSR, we have this notion that, maybe we can achieve this utopia, and maybe we can live in this world that's globally connected, and through globalization, nations will not be at war with each other anymore. Like, we had all these ideals. But again, now we're seeing how that is not really the case. We are on the precipice of, I believe, and probably a greater global conflict. And I've talked about this in my other videos, but by that conjunction in 2026, like, we could possibly see a very widespread enmeshment of countries being in again total war. So that whole premise, or that whole vision, has not really come true. So what we're really trying to do here, and I think by listening to this and other content that I'll be coming out with about this conjunction coming up, it's like it's not too late to turn that ship around. Like, with Saturn Neptune, we have to actually invest in our spiritual health, our mental health, our physical health, because Pisces is also about those things. But again, by really understanding what our purpose is individually and not being defined by, again, this very, systematized world, and this world that's very top heavy, top down. We can trust our own instincts, our own intuition. Our intuition is leading us in the right direction. So, with Saturn and Neptune retrograde in Pisces, also another theme I want to talk about is that we are being pulled from our fantasies and forced to confront reality without really any cushion to the blow. And it is a period that is stirring up some feelings of despair and confusion, because Pisces can feel, very numb to reality, very overwhelmed emotionally. So as you're listening to this, I'm sure, and I've experienced this through, messages I've received on social media and so on, conversations I've had with friends, a lot of people are overwhelmed right now. A lot of people are feeling like they can barely handle the emotional stimulation and just the deluge of feelings that are coming in every time they turn on the news, or every time, they think about their lives, and they think about, okay, maybe there is a wide gap right now between the fantasy of what I'm hoping for, what I'm thinking my life can be, and the reality of it right now. But that sort of splash of cold water during these retrogrades is kind of what, in a lot of ways, it's kind of what we all need. Because then it's like, okay, I'm not going to prolong something, or I'm not going to evade, I'm not going to obfuscate. I'm just going to be like, this is like where I'm at right now. This is what I want. I'm going to close that gap between fantasy and reality, between now and the end of the year. Again, use this retrograde to be really brutally honest with yourself. Not in a defeatist way, but to say, like, okay, if I want to become a spiritual practitioner, if I want to, live a healthy lifestyle, Like, what changes do I need to enact today and tomorrow? And how do I continue that dedication to that change and that transformation? And, if I think about, I mean, another theme here is just like really just trace back all the moments in the last, since Saturn station direct last year. Like, think about all the moments where maybe you've like, deceived yourself, or where you've run into a situation where something is not as it seems. Like, that's very Piscean. Because, like, when you have Neptune in Pisces, which we've had for 13 years, there's all kinds of moments where it's like, oh, here's this bright, shiny thing. It's going to save me, because Neptune in Pisces has this idea of like a savior. Everything will be fine if I just take this magic pill. Everything will be perfect if I, just kind of, like, everything will be fine if I just distract myself by, falling asleep to like a movie I don't really care about each night. And like in my own life, a couple months ago, I, thought that I found a great apartment in the arts district in LA. And I was like, it was like, oh, this is like it's like spacious. This is like, all these amenities that I want. And then as soon as I actually moved in and I got there, like I literally only spent 2 nights there. And then I realized, like, this is not the apartment, like, at all that I would ever want. Like, the energy is completely changed. And when I actually got to the apartment, I was like, how dumb was I to like ever even think when I was touring it that this place would be for me? But like for some reason, I mean, for a number of reasons, like the energy was off, and there were all these logistical challenges. Like the Wi-Fi was never working in the building, off and on for like the 2 days I was there, and then the week I was out of town. It was like all these things were just like not really working as planned. And like I remember even like the first night I slept there, it was like I was having these really weird nightmares, like strange visions. But then I was like, okay, like that feels a little whack. But then I'm also like, but the Wi-Fi doesn't even work, and I don't really like the neighborhood, and all these things, like nothing was adding up. And I was like, well, how did like the other version of me a few weeks ago like see this place and think like that's where I'm supposed to be? Like that was an example of like, you know, being again like kind of deceiving myself and just assuming that it's going to work out. I think another element that's very Piscean in my life where again, I've had to kind of rethink the way that I live is like, a couple years ago getting sober. I used to drink all the time in New York City when I was living there as part of like the party culture. And at that time it's like I had no sense of like what was the impact of that, like how destructive that is, right? Like to be putting basically poison in your body. It's like that really adds up over time. But when you're in the moment, it's like, oh, it's fine because everyone else is doing it. And, I love to just get lost in the moment. So that's something that you might be reevaluating right now. Is like, what are your health practices, health choices? What are you putting into your body? And we also have, you know, uh, to extend on that theme, like cleansing and detoxing. That's something I'm trying to think about right now. It's like being a little bit more discerning about like, not being general about like, oh, as long as I'm not doing this, I should be healthy. It's like, no, no, no. Let's actually look at like everything I'm doing in terms of my health practices. So that's another theme. And during this time, you think about even like seeing partners or people in your life as they actually are, and not idealizing them or thinking that again, not thinking they're going to save you or that you're going to save them. That's something else. That's another thing to think about. And just to draw in, I guess, another experience from my own life recently, it's like even just the realities of even doing the thing you love, right? Like there are aspects of like doing what you love that you have to understand, like where you're going and what it is and what it isn't, and like have really clear expectations of like, what is this, like how does this contribute to your well-being and to your life? So for example, like I'm doing what I love, which is great, being a social media creator, being an astrologer, and helping people every day. But like let's say, when I started this, like, it was like, okay, I there was like this idea of like, oh wow, like becoming a social media creator, it's like this bright, shiny thing. And there's like a dopamine rush of like, oh, I'm getting this recognition or getting these views. But then it's like with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, it's like, okay, you have to know what aspects of your even like doing what you love is going to be fulfilling for you and what is like pure vanity, right? So like in my life, it's like, okay, would I want to focus on like are my objectives to help people or to like literally just reach as many people as possible or to like any number of these things. It's like you have to have a really clear vision of like why you're doing what you're doing. So again, in my example, it's like, I feel like where I receive the most sort of psychic fulfillment, I guess, or fulfillment generally, is in doing readings, right? And also helping people anticipate what the energies, like where the energies are going, what are the contours of the energies, because that is helping people prepare and also helping people trust their intuition, trust that, they're on the right path and to take, you know, again, to kind of like, have their own internal compass that they can use to chart their own course in life and to walk a path that's maybe never been walked before. So that's where I derive fulfillment. And I think that if if I had gone into this whole venture purely, with the goal of like being seen by as many people as possible all the time, then that would compromise the quality of like what I'm doing. So even if you're already doing what you love, you're listening to this podcast, you're like, Evan, like I feel like I have that. There's still plenty to evaluate in that area. Like, what are you actually expecting the results to be of what you're doing? Because if you're not happy like with what you're doing, it's like maybe you're expecting something out of that is not actually like, valuable, right? So again, like vanity or again, like and if you're not on the not on a track you want to be on right now at all, then like just again, think about is like are my responsibilities right now, are the things that I'm dedicating time to in my life, are they really feeling connected to what my soul is yearning for? Does it feel like it's contributing to like the collective consciousness? Do I feel like I'm part of something greater? And I think that's another key with Pisces is like feeling like there's something of a higher power or a muse or a force outside of yourself that you're plugging into and that you're connected to and that you're really chasing some sort of higher truth. So these are the themes that you're going to want to visit during the Saturn Neptune retrograde. So number 1 is our susceptibility to external influences like media and celebrity culture, because that is part of Pisces. It is the mass media, it is celebrities, it's prestige, fame, and worship of these idols, which could be celebrities. So really, this is a time where you want to catch the inversion of narratives within the media, where maybe even if you think about it politically, maybe there's a leader or a president or a senator or congressman or someone who is not practicing what they preach, or they're providing misleading, hypocritical, contradictory information. So this is a time where you really want to, pay attention to, again, what is being shown on the television? What are you actually seeing with your own eyes? Probably a gap there. And again, anything that honestly, anything you're seeing in the mainstream media, you have to think about like, how are they deploying certain like emotional like tactics to manipulate you into like staying engaged, right? Like a lot of news stories, they're trying to keep you engaged. So think about that and really get like back up, like, and get another sort of source, or a third source anytime you're watching something in the news. Another theme of these retrogrades is escapist behaviors and vices that, divorce us from reality, which I've talked about already, but think about your health in all senses of that word. So what are you putting in your body? How are there any toxins in your environment? Like, are there preservatives in your food that are affecting you? Is there Um, again, mental health is a big key as well. So, what are the sources of stress in my life? And am I taking time off? Am I taking care of myself? That is another key theme. We also have a theme of the decentralization of personal health choices. So, obviously, we've lived through a time period the past few years where health decisions have kind of been handed down and sort of universalized, regardless of the unique traits of the individual. And so, I think during a retrograde like this, you may start to think about, okay, what's an alternative model to that? Like, could I maybe start to, focus on preventing things from, like things from happening by living healthy, and dedicating to my health every day. We also have the theme of the integrity of our leaders and institutions. So Saturn Neptune conjunctions, which we're coming up to right now, is also about the lack of solidity and integrity to the most sort of high visibility leaders in our society, and really any authority figures. And just to give a quick anecdote about that, if you talk to people who are born in like 1989 or 1990, a lot of them will tell you very similar things about their fathers. They will say, my father is elusive, or he was absent, or maybe an alcoholic, or just not consistent. That's not everybody, of course, but it's very common. And that's because of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction of that time. And Saturn is father figures, but also authority figures more broadly. And Neptune, again, is very, again, it's not solid. It's not certain. And so you're not only going to see that in someone's birth chart, potentially, but you're going to see that in the society. So, we have two presidential candidates who are, for different reasons, or sort of in the same way in a lot of ways, are in very compromising positions. We think about, well, what's their fitness to run? Like, their age is definitely a factor. What is their moral standing? And we have Trump and Biden debating on June 27th, 2 days before Saturn retrogrades, alongside a Pisces moon on the night of the debate. So, like, that's the literal climax of that whole topic of aging leaders. And, consider the fact that Saturn stations direct shortly after the US elections in November. So it could be like a catalytic moment, that debate, or surrounding those debates, that both parties may reflect on in the ensuing months. Like, is Biden going to maybe say something or behave in a way that creates a lot of anxiety in his party, and thinking about maybe we need to search for an alternative? Is something like that going to happen to Trump? Like, both of them may behave in ways at the debate that is just like not becoming of a president. And then we're like, well, why are these the two options? Why is it always this sort of like, again, right left paradigm, the two biggest brands? It's sort of like that Pepsi and Coke effect. Like, what do we like? We're getting so like sucked in as always to that sort of that bifurcation. But with Saturn and Neptune, it's like maybe that whole system is dissolving. Maybe we need to search for an alternative candidate who can create that. And maybe this is a utopic vision that we'll never achieve, but like maybe there is a candidate out there who can help us unify around something. And maybe that cause is the depravity of the ruling class, right? Because we also have Pluto in Aquarius. And, think about the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, the French Revolution. And, I'm reading a book about that right now to kind of tap into what was that time period like, the last cycle. And it's like, what we're really experiencing is, a sense that, the ruling class does not really represent our needs, and they don't really empathize or understand our experiences, or, their goal is mostly to, I would say cynically, to weaken the populace and keep us kind of in a controlled state and keep us in a state of fear, to keep us in the lower vibrations. But I think we're sort of all catching on to that game. And we're seeing where that's led us. It's led us to these unsatisfactory candidates and options because that system is so tightly controlled by corporate interests or, by, well, just by the money in a candidate's arsenal. And while money can represent popularity and demand and the sort of, the potential behind that candidate, I still think that we've reached a point where, again, the options simply do not represent the enlightenment journey that we're on. I mean, that's very clear. So there is like, even though it's like, even though even though everyone listening to this, like, even though everybody knows that this is a train wreck of an election, we're allowing it to continue as is. But and because of that, I think there is still a big wake up call coming here, big reality check, and this expectations versus reality sort of discrepancy. Really, we just don't want to hold on to these fantasies, and it's a lot easier said than done because these fantasies are so enmeshed in our reality, which I know sounds ironic or contradictory, I should say. But it's like, since 1989, we've had the proliferation of like cable news, for example, and the 24-hour news cycle, and the sort of optimization of a story to cut to commercial at the right time, right during a cliffhanger, to, again, hook us in through fear, through desire, through these really low consciousness states of emotion. So it's like you, me, everyone, like nobody is completely above that, right? Like we are all just like, you can live a healthy life, like nutritionally, but it's like when you step outside, there's still pollution everywhere. That's like we are in a polluted society. And so we all have to apply a filter at all times. We have to filter through, like, we have to apply a very filtered lens to everything that we're witnessing to really try to figure out, how do I decondition? How do I reprogram such that I don't buy the BS? Because it's fed to you every day. Even if you resist it, there's a bit of attrition. This is a battle of attrition. So every time you turn on your phone, every time you watch the television, you have to fight against these inverted narratives. You have to, willingly rise above these sort of lower frequency sources of information. And so you're always being pulled downward. But during this retrograde, it's like, just by seeing that machination, that process, that mechanism for what it is, in the cold hard truth of that you are being siphoned of your energy every day through these fear-mongering tactics. Like, just by seeing that for what it is, like, you, I think, can maybe come up with a new way to extricate yourself from that, or to come up with an even firmer, more committed enlightenment path. Like maybe you take more time away from the media. Maybe you take more time, you dedicate more time towards meditation. Because Saturn teaches us that everything has an opportunity cost. And so, what are you giving up to do something else? Okay, well, if I'm starting to meditate more often, if I'm doing breath work more often, if I'm thinking about the food I'm putting into my body, if I'm thinking about my health choices, yeah, I am taking time away from these so-called experts telling me what's really happening in the world, which again is totally distorted, or a certain like experts in the healthcare system trying to tell me exactly what I need to be doing. Like there's all sorts of, again, misguided directions, misguided advice, and that advice is misguided because a lot of the sort of experts are educated in a way that's not reflective of like who we are holistically, systemically. Like for example, just like in the healthcare industry, like the body is a system. It's not treated that way. It's like we look at and diagnose like very specific ailments in very specific areas of the body, and that maybe creates a kink somewhere else. And that's not, again, that's not nurturing us. We think about the fact that our mental health is still somewhat of a taboo subject. And then we also think about that spiritual wellness and spiritual health is not taken seriously. Like I was at the auto dealership today, um, and there was some news story about how like it was like treated like a breakthrough story. Like 1 in 6 people do yoga on a weekly basis, and like the reporter was saying, supposedly yoga, like people do this supposedly because it helps them feel like they have a sense of purpose in life, as if they were like explaining just like some like zoo animal, and they're observing like, wow, like how bizarre is this behavior. It's like it's so novel and so fascinating and so foreign. It's like, no, like things like yoga or reiki or acupuncture, like these are they're not really fringe at this point. They don't have to be alternative, but the media may paint it that way. So it's like there's a latency, there's a lag in what you may be experiencing and doing and talking about in your personal circles, and what is still sort of going on at a societal level, which is like, yeah, I mean, energy it's probably not a thing, probably doesn't matter. There is no quantum field where we can manifest things. Like that's still the prevailing notion in our society. So during Saturn Neptune retrograde, just recognize that you are in that ocean. You still have a lot of work to do. So even as you do that work, even if you feel like you've mastered the art of coherence, fulfillment, purpose, spiritual sensibility, even if you have these intuitive tools very sharp, even if you've sharpened these tools, Saturn is a responsibility, and you have a responsibility to now go out there and help others turn that light on, because we still need millions, arguably billions of people to turn that light on. And you can play a role in setting off that wildfire of truth and illumination and enlightenment. So thank you very much. I'm Evan Nathaniel Grim. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of my brand new podcast. And I really appreciate your time every week listening to this, and your review would be immensely valuable. So if you want to give it a review, a rating, that would really help us get it out to more people. We've gotten really encouraging results on the podcast, and actually we saw that it peaked at number 4 in the US on, I think it was Apple Podcasts in the spirituality category. So really, that's, really encouraging to see. And we want to get this to number 1. So let's do it. So if you want to leave a review, I'd really appreciate that. And again, don't forget to subscribe to my Substack, and take care. And we'll see you next week.